Brexit. Do we get a deal? Do we not get a deal? Does it even matter? Well, yes, it does. And I'm here to argue it's not just important what deal we get, but what's more important is when we get the deal. My name is Sanjay Shelat, and let's talk about Brexit. And I'm now going to turn off my music because I have no fancy equipment or anything, and I'm actually just doing this in one take. So I'd like to start about where we were and how this began, where we are now, and then I'm going to argue why it's important when we get a deal. So, back on the 23rd of June 2016, we had a referendum to leave the EU, and 51.9% of people chose to leave. And the turnout was fantastic. We had 72.2% of people voting. It was amazing. And there were lots of people, retrospectively, who then argued that maybe we shouldn't decide such a monumental change based on such a small margin of winning. There are also people after Brexit who actually changed their minds based on what they called being lied to. Things like Boris Johnson saying he'd be able to give £350 million a year to the NHS if we left the EU, which of course has not manifested at all. But irrespective of whether it was right or wrong, let's now bring us to where we are right now. So, on the 29th of March 2019, at 11 p.m. local time, we will leave the EU. That's where we're headed. So we're trying to decide, or we're trying to get a deal sorted before then, which will carry us through. And there's lots of kerfuffle about this, whether we get a deal, whether we don't. And what that deal is it hard Brexit? Is it soft Brexit? Is it just a no deal entirely and we just exit and see where the chips land? And I'd like to talk about now why it's important when we get a deal. And I like to do this using an example. And I'd like to use the insurance industry. But Sanjay, insurance is really boring. Why would you use insurance? Well, I'm using insurance exactly because it's really boring. There's nothing particularly exciting about insurance. But there are two good reasons it's a great example. Firstly, insurance are just about the numbers. They don't care about morals. They don't really care about ethics or anything like that. They just look at the hard data. So, for example, a lot of people left the EU on moral grounds or ethical grounds, things like wanting sovereignty back or wanting their laws to only be made by this country and not having laws made by someone else imposed on them. And they're really, really valid arguments. As far as insurance is concerned, they just look at the hard data. So, for example, one of the things that's happened since we left the EU, strongly arguably, as a direct result of Brexit, actually, is that the average household has lost £404. Yes, that includes you. And we're seeing a loss of between 2 and 2.5% of the UK GDP. So, economically, things have gotten worse because of our choice to leave. And our big issue is they could get worse. Now, the other reason I'm using the insurance industry is because actually it's big and it affects you. Yes, you. It really does, actually. So if we look, they employ 300,000 people and the UK has a huge industry covering people globally. So £20 billion are in export earnings. That's earnings from insuring people abroad, put simplistically. Very importantly, £12 billion are paid in taxes to the government every year from this industry. That's £12 million that contributes towards building our roads and, yes, keeping the NHS running. So if that industry is hit by Brexit, it reduces taxes into the government and that affects you. And that's the important thing. That's why it's important to you, actually. So what's happening? Oh, the other thing is worth mentioning, because I find it fascinating actually, was that actually in the UK we have 60% of the global aviation market, we have 52% of the global energy market, and we have 33% of the global maritime market. So it's a really big industry over here in the UK, and it's affected globally, which means leaving the EU could massively affect the industry. This has already had effects. So in terms of transitional changes, so people prepping, I read a white paper by Kennedy's, one of the global leaders in insurance law, and one of their clients has already spent 50 million on preparing for the transition. And there are clients in the banking sector who have spent in excess of 150 million, again, preparing for that transition. That's changes in IT structure, that's and potentially moving location. So, for example, it's no surprise that Kennedy's themselves, as a specialist in insurance law, a few months after the referendum, opened an office in Dublin, because Dublin is still in the EU. Shocker. So, what's important? Well, here's the thing. People have already started spending money on leaving the EU because they're prepping for a no deal. That is the worst case scenario for those people and these companies, Because if there is no deal, all of the trade laws that are in place, etc., sort of disappear overnight. All the, the external dispute resolution systems vanish. This is a huge problem. So people need to prep for it. We are currently in mid-October. If a deal is not made by the end of October, what that means is firms like Kennedy's have openly said they're going to advise their clients at this point that they must action their plan B. They must take action to put in place whatever is needed to cope with a no-deal Brexit. That means they're taking action as if the worst case scenarios happens. So if the politicians kick their heels and they make a deal at the last minute in February or even on 28th of March, that's all well and good. It's brilliant long term. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but the detrimental effect of that plan B being action has already happened. Companies have already moved their offices abroad. They've already started to make their staff redundant. They've already spent millions in changing their IT infrastructure. And once those systems have changed, once those changes are put in place, are they really going to reverse them just because the deal has come through? Or are they just going to stick with that because that's now working, right? Why would you change that? So the detrimental impact of a no-deal Brexit is going to be felt now if a deal isn't made by the end of October. So even if we don't no deal, even if we do get a deal, even if we get the best deal we could possibly want, if it happens over in March, a lot of the effects of a no deal, the worst case, will be already in place and therefore will already feel them. If you've already lost £404 a year since the referendum, that's only going to go up. A reduction in GDP, we've seen a reduction in growth, and is that going to carry on happening? Just this morning, the head of Toyota put in a press release, in front of the Guardian actually, was urging Britain to make a deal. It's really bad news, not just if we don't get a deal, but if we don't get a deal before the end of October. And really, we're already mid-October. So that's why it's as important that we get a deal sooner. The timing of the deal is just as important as the deal we get, because if we get the deal, but we don't get it till the nth hour, we're still going to feel the economic effects, and you're going to have less money in your pocket, and the government going to have less money for the NHS. It really is as simple as that. I've been Sanjay Shelat. Thank you very much.